Good afternoon and welcome to today's Corporate Partner and Affiliate webinar, How to be better at capturing and replicating successful behaviours in projects. I'm Lauren Humphrey, part of the membership team here at APM. A few housekeeping rules before we get started. Today's session is recorded and will become a resource for you on the Membership Hub section of the website. It will also be available on the dedicated Corporate Partner and Affiliate YouTube channel on APM. Attendees, you're muted. This is to avoid disruption. However, there will be opportunities to ask questions in the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. Without further ado, I'm pleased to hand over to Tricia Moon, Commercial Partnership Manager at APM, for the formal introductions.
Thanks, Lauren. Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is the third in our series on project management behaviours that Wendy has been leading for us. So Wendy Shooter, our presenter today, is a chartered organisational psychologist. She's been working in project organisations for over 20 years. And it's all about helping people think about how they work together to make things happen and helping them understand more about how their behaviours will impact on others and obviously impact the outcomes being achieved. Her specialist areas include culture, collaboration such as alliances and joint ventures, and executive coaching. And she's also developed an approach to well-being to underpin all of this, and there is a supporting phone app for that. But today the focus from Wendy is going to be on how we can do things differently to better identify and capture behaviours that will bring about success. So thanks for joining us again, Wendy, and over to you.
Thanks, Tricia. Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. So I look forward to spending the next hour with you. Hello to those of you I've not met before in particular. So just to give you an overview of the three webinars that we've done in total. So this is the third one. The first one was focusing on why. So in the first webinar, we looked at why is it so difficult? I think everyone can identify with a desire to do behaviours in a more helpful way and an awareness that behaviours are important and make a difference. So it's like, well, why is it so hard? And that's what we talked about in the first webinar. In the last webinar, we talked about lessons from lockdown. So this was some research that I did in project organisations in the summer about what had been different during lockdown in terms of how they'd done things, how they'd gone about things. And what were the positives, actually? So it was about drawing out the positives of the changes that happened in terms of how people were behaving together so that learning could be incorporated into activities going forward. What we're going to do today is look at, okay, so what can we do about it? We know it's a problem. What can we actually do to get the behaviours that we want to see in our project organisations? So I'll just do a little intro of myself before we dive into that. So some of you I know like to know about studying qualifications. So here's some of mine. So I did, my first degree was in psychology and zoology, and I studied penguin behaviours, my final year project. So I've been looking at behaviour for a really long time. Then I focused more in the human area. I mean, my degree was human and animal. And I trained in counselling when I was in my 20s. And then I did my master's in occupational psychology. So I decided I wanted to take all of my learning and knowledge and understanding about being human into organisations and use that to help people find ways to do things in a more helpful way at work. I've become a chartered psychologist, so that's through doing lots and lots of hours in all of this good stuff. So Tricia mentioned that this is the sort of stuff I do on the day-to-day, and you'll all be familiar with this. I think the sorts of things that I do, sort of workshops, one-team workshops, coaching, culture change, collaboration events, training development, all that good stuff. So lots of psychometrics, and I'm also an ILM level 7 leadership coach. So just to give you a bit of a background to me. Oh, and a yoga teacher. So more recently, I trained to be a yoga teacher. And one of the things that was really interesting about that actually was being on the learning side. I think because a lot of what I do is about helping others to learn to do things differently. and try out some different things. And it takes us out of our comfort zone. When we do behaviours, different behaviours, it takes us out of our comfort zone. So I like to quite often take myself out of my comfort zone so I can remain empathetic with how that feels. So these are some of the organisations that I've worked with. As you can see, lots of project organisations here, and your organisations that you're in might be up here as well. So they're some of the organisations that, as Trish I've been working with over the last 20 years. Some of them haven't been around for that long, as like HS2 haven't been around for 20 years, but I think most of the others have actually, in one form or another. So the first webinar that we did was, as I said, what gets in the way? What gets in the way of these behaviours? And we're going to look today at what we can do about it. But I just wanted to touch on the what gets in the way to just remind us, because I'll be covering off all of these areas as we go through today, but I'm not going to use these headings. So when I came to think about, okay, what's the best way to share the information about what we need to do, and it was in a slightly different way to against these headings. So what we said before, some of the things that get in the way, people are attached to their behaviour, so they are uncomfortable about looking to do things differently. They don't want to think that they were doing things wrong. People believe that intent alone is enough. So and I'm going to say some more about that in a moment. Clarity, so we need to know exactly what is required. Otherwise, how on earth could we work out what to do? And we need to have competence, so we need to know what to do, how to do it. We need to develop the skill and the competence to do that. And then the other aspect is the environment. So we're all amazing social creatures, and we will adapt to our environment. So we will, I don't know if you've ever changed jobs, gone into a new organisation, and perhaps been surprised at how quickly you've adapted to the new culture, and maybe found yourself doing things you would never have done, or doing them in a way you would never have done a month earlier. We do adjust to cultures quite amazingly. I think our adaptability has been shown in the way we've adapted to changes of late, actually. And so the culture, but also the contract and other aspects, all are what get in the way of us doing the behaviour change that we might want to see. So I'm going to visit intent, because that is kind of like the starting point, if you like. So this is what, and I had this slide for you guys last time, this is what I see happen in organisations. People say, senior leaders say, can everyone be more collaborative, please? And remember, communication is key. And there's a belief almost that having this intent and saying it out loud is enough to make change happen. So what I've seen happen is this kind of statement gets made. The team will go, yes, absolutely, we will do that. We know that it's important, and we will try harder, and yes, we will absolutely be more collaborative. Thanks, says the boss. And everyone goes away believing that it'll all be different and they'll all live happily ever after. Now, that's maybe a bit trite, but it's not really, because I think this is what people believe. And there's something about behaviour, because we all do behaviour all the time, and we all have an understanding of what some of the words mean, like collaborative, communication. We have a muddled perspective that this alone will get us the change that we need. But actually, we all know that it doesn't. So let's look at what we can do to get that change. So let's start off with the intent. So the intent of the boss at the podium going, we all need to be more collaborative. Everyone goes, yay! So let's have a look at what we actually need to do rather than just make the statement. Okay, so there's quite a few things here, aren't there? I was actually a little bit surprised when I created the list just how many things were on there. So if you actually want to deliver on this intent to be more collaborative, then these are all the things that you need to do. If you don't do all of these things, then that will reduce the impact of your efforts. So we're going to go through these, and this is what we'll be working through today. I'll say a little bit about them all before we get into the detail of them all. So the first one, identify what it means. So the micro behaviour, so understanding exactly what it is that needs to be different. Because we tend to talk in these mega labels of collaborative, more collaborative, need to communicate better. Oh, that team needs some leadership. But what do we actually mean by that? So we need to be clear on what those behaviours actually look like. And then build shared understanding about what some of those words mean and how they are. We need to look at the context. So this is about the approaches, the systems, the processes, the contracts that we're working to. All of these things provide the kind of the enablers for the behaviours that we're looking for. And if we're asking for one behaviour, but actually the working environment is pushing people into a different behaviour, then we're less likely to get the behaviours that we want. And I've written decision making here just in a little brackets, but actually decision making is kind of key to behaviours. And I can actually look at the decision making processes in an organisation. If you map out how decisions are being made, where they're made, how they're made, who by, I can tell you what your culture will be. Because the decision-making process is actually the foundation of your culture and the behaviours that you get in your organisation. So what next? So they're all kind of the background. And then, now the first thing we need to do is develop the leaders and the managers. Start to develop the leaders and the managers. I always think it's a little bit unfair when a whole new wave of let's do it this way comes in, and the leaders and managers get to see it about the same time that everybody else does. And then they're in a team meeting that afternoon and not doing the behaviour, and one of their team goes, oh, you're not supposed to do that anymore. Because we can't make behaviour change like that. It can't just change overnight. We can't suddenly wake up and be collaborative. Changing behaviours takes a lot of energy, a lot of effort. There's a lot of trial and error. It can be 2 steps forward, 1 step back sometimes, and it's unrealistic to do wholesale change. And also, if you do wholesale change, people won't know where they're at with you. They'll feel very psychologically unsteady. If you completely transform your personality overnight, they will not know where they are. So this is the bit that often gets missed out, actually, doing something with the leaders and managers first. So they've got a bit of a head start before we start to bring everybody else in. Now they're talking about demonstrating them. So it is the behaviours of the leaders and managers that create the behaviours of everybody else and the culture of the organisation. They don't like it when I say that, but it's true. Then we need to support everybody else to develop. I mean, I'm talking about these things in a linear list. So we do 1, then we do 2, then we do 3, and actually it's not as linear as that. It's much more integrated and involved, and loops and some iterative processes and all of that good stuff. But just for ease of explanation, I've done it as a list. But yeah, it really isn't quite like that. So as well as developing these behaviours, helping them learn the behaviours that we want and know how to do them, it's about, okay, so what does that mean for me in my day-to-day? So we're talking about maybe listening better. When would I do that? How would I do that? And that again is a bit that often gets missed. People will put on development programs or do workshops, and there's the whole thing about knowing about the skill, but then being able to do the skill, and then knowing when to use it, and being able to do that is a whole different level. Rewarding the behaviour, so rewarding the right behaviours, and I don't mean with money, but with acknowledgement, and challenging those that aren't right. So in this case, we're talking about collaborative behaviours. So calling it out, pointing it out, helping people think about doing it in a different way, helping people notice that they're maybe not doing it in a helpful way. Because if we don't do this, then we'll just keep getting the old behaviours, because it's easier. It's so much easier to do the old behaviours. What often happens with behaviour stuff is I don't know, you'll do something, you'll do some events, or you'll do some development or some coaching, whatever, and people will go, oh yes, well, I was going to do it on Tuesday, and then the project got terribly busy and there was an emergency, and I didn't have time for all that. I didn't have time for all that thing. So yeah, it's about learning to do it in an ongoing, integrated, one little bit at a time. And we also, so one of the things that I talked to Trisha about in the beginning was about this whole lessons learnt process. So we need to review the effectiveness of behaviours all the time, and not just take them at the end of a point. And how are the behaviours? It's like, how are the behaviours today? How are the behaviours in that meeting? And then the last two about this whole thing about building it into the knowledge of the organisation, of the industry, of society, I would say, of the behaviours, of the benefits of the behaviours. So it's about joining the dots. When I did the research for Lessons from Lockdown, actually, one of the it was a very senior guy, actually, very experienced, was talking to me about how people just don't join the dots when a project goes really well, and it's been because of the behaviours. That they don't acknowledge that because they don't see it, they don't recognise that input got that output, they attribute it to other things. So it's about making sure that we actually attribute the outcomes to the behaviours when appropriate. So let's get into these then. We're going to get into them all in detail. So we'll start with the first one. So the micro behaviours. So this is and I'll give you some examples in a moment. This is the minutiae of the behaviours, because as I said, we tend to talk about being more collaborative, or communication being better, or giving better leadership. And I mean, what on earth does that mean? And if I asked you to write down what being collaborative meant, you would all write down different things. You may have some overlap, but you would write down different things. And so it's getting into the actual lines of description that people are able to then replicate. So they can look at it and go, okay, I know what that means. That would be doing this. And you can talk about it in a way that people understand. So the way to do this, and this is work that I do in organisations sometimes, is to find out what it looks like in practice, and that is to ask you guys. So when you're looking at identifying micro behaviours that are helpful and unhelpful, it's about sitting down with lots of different practitioners, either one-to-one or in groups, working through some questions. So what does good look like? Can you talk to me about a time a project went really well? What were people doing? And digging deeper. So it's the deeper levels of inquiry that churn out the really good data, because people will often, my experience of doing this, and I've done quite a lot of this, is people struggle to describe the behaviours. If I say, can you describe the behaviours, they just give me a few words, and I have to keep coming in with extra questions and checking things out to actually get the final descriptors. Which is quite interesting, and I think that in itself just shows us how we don't tend to think about the micro behaviours. It's there, it's in us, because when I dig, I can get it out of people, but they don't offer it up initially, and they have to dig around to find it. So these micro behaviours aren't often at the forefront of our minds. We're not used to thinking in terms of micro behaviours. I think we can change that, but at the moment that tends to be how it is. So we need to understand what it looks like when it's working really well, and when it's not working well, what does it look like when things don't go so great. And then when you've got all of that, and that's data, so I call that data, qualitative data, from here then you define the behaviours, and you do that through analysis and theming. Put all of it together, group it up, pull it apart, move it around to create the behaviours. That's how we create the groupings of behaviours and the micro behaviours that enable them. And then the next step from there is to review and refine those with practitioners, because you guys are the experts on what works and what doesn't. So when we've got all the information out to you, we then need to work with you to further refine and review it, so that it absolutely is a representation of what works and what doesn't work in your environment and in your profession, sometimes in your organisation. So that's how we identify them. And then it's about building shared understanding around this. So it's about socialising them, socialising the micro behaviours, sharing them around as information. It's about putting them out there as this is what we're moving towards. In the first instance, at some point this is what we're doing, but in the first instance, this is what we're moving towards. So it's not a stick to beat people with, and people have some space to come to the party, if you like. Because if you try and make it as this is what you're doing today, then it's just unrealistic. People can't achieve it, and if it's unrealistic and people can't achieve it, then it will just become more and more marginalised, and it will just become yesterday's initiative that nothing ever really happened with. And we all know about those. So it's about doing it in a staged way, as in stage 1, stage 2. So you do it over a period of time. And helping people learn to talk in terms of the micro behaviours and creating a shared language around that. So that's some of the things we can do in the kind of setting up phase of the behaviour change. And I'll share with you some of what micro behaviours look like, actually. So if you look at these, this is an example of what they could be. I'm not saying this is what they are, this is what they could be. So if we take a look at this, so seeks input and listens to understand. So that's a much easier thing to have a conversation with people about. Did you ask others to contribute? How did you do that? When have we sought input? Did we involve people? Did we actually really listen to understand what they were saying? To what extent do we let people contribute in that meeting? Is the space? And actually you can say, oh yeah, we always ask. How do we ask? Is the time. So there's lots of exploration that you can do around all of these, but it's about getting into having these micro behaviour descriptors, so that you can really get into the detail and touch the actuality of the behaviours, rather than talking about it at a high level. Because it's not until you get into the minutiae that people can actually really connect with it and understand what they are doing or perhaps aren't doing on a day-to-day basis, and understand about it in that way. So joint decision making here. Joint decision making is a great one, because people often don't do that. That is a helpful one to be really specific about. It's like, okay, so how many joint decisions do we make, and what do we mean by joint decisions? Is a joint decision we told people we were going to make it? Because for some people they will say that oh yeah, we've done engagement, we told people we were doing it. That's a particular favourite of mine. So there's some examples of what micro behaviours can look like. So we move on now to the third area. Now I quite like this one. Ensure systems and contracts enable and support. A nice easy little line to write, quite another level of activity to make that happen. So this is approaches, systems, processes, contracts, decision making. So as I said, decision making will form the basis of your culture. How decisions get made, it's a really good way to look at your culture, actually, to map out the decision making, the who and the how. And it's very telling. It's very telling. You look at the decision-making process, and then you say, this is why we have the culture we have and the behaviours that we have. So, it's a real fundamental here. So when we're looking to introduce certain behaviours and culture, then we need to work with the people that do activities day to day to identify where the clashes are. And I think people know, people absolutely know. Whenever I work in organisations, they go, oh, they're saying that, but then the system is making us do this. So collaboration, here we go. So say it's a supplier contractor collaboration. There's lots of those, and it may be that the contractor can't access the system. That's a classic. That is a classic. So they're supposed to make joint decisions, or they're supposed to be in the know about being kept up to date, complete transparency. But actually, they can't access the system. That's a classic one. So already you've got a problem. So those people that can't access the system will feel that the collaboration isn't genuine, and then it will be harder for them to summon the energy to put the extra effort in to deliver the collaborative behaviours. Because with collaboration in particular, actually, if one side feels that the other isn't coming to the party, they often withdraw a bit themselves. So it's something that needs to be in balance. And if the way decision making is happening, so collaboration again is the good example to keep with here. So if the decision making is happening in isolation and not involving others, then that will undermine your intentions around collaborative behaviours, and you won't get collaboration. When you've got decision making that happens in isolation, you will not have collaboration. So it's about understanding the whole picture and all the different elements that are linking in. And we need to seek to make changes to the things that don't support the behaviours and the cultures that we want. So and I know that's an easy sentence to say, so changing the systems, are you crazy? Changing the contracts, that's even crazier. So seek to make changes with effort and timeliness, because people quite often will go, oh yeah, they're working on that. And quite often the people working on it don't recognise how important it is, because they're in a different part of the organisation and there isn't joined upness in terms of the intent of direction. So seek to make changes, or if you can't, then work out how you're going to manage that, how you're going to manage the narrative around that, how you're going to allow people access to what they can't access. But we can't just ignore it, go, yes, we know it's a problem. I mean, they see this so much, yes, we know it's a problem. So all of these things are enablers for the behaviours that we want. So the next one is about starting to develop the behaviours in the leaders and the managers. So it's a process, not an event. So this is ongoing. This takes a while. It needs to be in achievable steps. Like I said, behaviours need to be integrated into the day-to-day. And it's nice to do this stuff as a group. So behaviour development as a group is great, because you can all support each other then to do things differently. And you can be working on certain aspects, certain micro behaviours as a team. And then you can notice what each other are doing or not doing. You can call each other out when you're not doing it in a constructive way, obviously. But doing it as a group is a really nice and helpful way to do it. And doing it as a group is what creates culture. And it means they can start to role model it, so they can try out the new behaviours in a way that their whole team isn't being expectant about. So the whole team's not expecting the behaviour, so they can start to bring it in day-to-day conversations and start to develop a skill in it themselves, so that they can then become the role models, because people will copy the behaviour of the leaders and managers. We can do as many fantastic trainings or development interventions or speeches, whatever you like, but at the end of the day, people will copy the behaviours of their leaders and managers, and they will, because they will see that at a sort of deep level as what success looks like around here, and also the behaviours that are rewarded. But we'll come on to that. And what we need to avoid in developing the leaders and the managers is the must try harder. We need to be more collaborative. guess. Yeah. So that's really not helpful. So activities can include group discussions, reflections, loads of input on how, 360, psychometrics, coaching. The coaching works very well actually, because what coaching allows is bespoke input around small aspects. So they can try a behaviour and then come back and have a discussion about what worked, what didn't work about that behaviour, and get some more input on how to make that behaviour successful. Because sometimes we might try a new behaviour, might not land quite right because we just missed a little bit, or it wasn't the right situation. And there needs to be some kind of review, reflection, retry when we're developing behaviours. We can't just go, oh yeah, great, got it, off we go. There needs to be some iterative process of revisiting, reviewing, getting some more input, going on to the next. Observation and feedback. We absolutely have to have observation and feedback with behaviours if we're going to really nail it. So that's quite difficult. But people do it. It's becoming more and more common. And I have the most admiration for the leaders that allow people to come and observe them and give them feedback. Okay, so demonstrating the behaviours all of the time, which is really hard. So when we start to ask the whole organisation to have certain behaviours, when we start to feel like we really need to start doing this in a consistent way, the leaders need to be being consistent themselves. So this is why we need to give them a bit of a head start. And also with all of this, the behaviours need to be developed in a way that's in keeping with their personality. And it's not about switching out, it's about broadening our behavioural range. So it's about helping people understand it's not those behaviours are wrong and these behaviours are right. It's about having a bigger range to choose from. So the bigger your range, the more opportunity you've got to pick the right behaviour for that particular moment. And also, this is one of my favourites, understanding that weaknesses are overplayed strengths. So again, this is back in that bad behaviour thing. It's not bad behaviour, it's a behaviour that's unhelpful in this scenario. And a way to think of this is action oriented. So let's say that Fred is very action oriented. Sometimes being action oriented is really helpful, it's great behaviour. On another day, Fred might get called impatient. So it's not that being action oriented is wrong, it's that sometimes it's a really helpful behaviour and sometimes it's not a helpful behaviour. So it's about Fred having some other behaviours in his bag that he can pull out and use. And it is about integrating these into how we do things in our personalities and using the behaviours in a way that allows us to still be who we are, because we need to have a congruence with ourselves. We need to be ourselves in the way that we do things. And trying to get people to behave outside of their personality is going to cause them stress and difficulty, and they won't be able to keep it up. And also other people won't feel right. We're amazing creatures as humans. We've got fantastic antennae for knowing what feels right and what doesn't feel right. And if people are behaving in a way that's really out of congruence with who they are, it doesn't feel right for people, and that's not psychologically safe. In a sort of leader team way, that becomes not psychologically safe for people. So it's a really important aspect, and people often think that they'll say, oh, you want me to do that, that's not who I am. But actually it is possible to do these things, to do these behaviours in a way that are in keeping with your personality. So let's have a look at the next one. So developing the behaviours for everybody. Knowledge, skill, ability, judgment. So there's 4 different aspects here. We can have the knowledge. Let's take joint decision making as an example here. So we can know about joint decision making. This is often where people stop with things. They know about it, so they don't need to do anything else. So we can know about joint decision making. We can know about how to do it. In fact, we can know that a way to do it is a certain method that we've learnt of how to share ideas before we get to the decision making point, and so forth. So we can have knowledge about it. But then we also need to have skill. So we need to have the skill of doing joint decision making. So as we all know, reading a book or watching a video or being told how to do something and then actually doing it is a whole other game. Driving is a perfect example here. But I mean, if we all think about all the behaviours, most people have tried to change some behaviours at some point. And knowing about the behaviour, you might sit in a training room or watch a video, is one thing, but when you actually come to do it, it's clunky, it doesn't work right, and you need to practice it and get feedback in order to develop that skill usually. And the feedback can be from another, or it can just be from the outcome. Outcomes can be a really good source of feedback. So we have the knowledge, we have the skill. Have we got the ability? So we might have the skill of doing joint decision making, and so I'm going to get this, I'm going to go to a meeting with this person and I'm going to do joint decision making, and I'm going to do it like this, and this is the process I'm going to use, and I'm going to do it. Okay, I've nailed this. But then the ability to use it is about being able to use it on the fly. So you weren't anticipating using it in this setting, you hadn't set it up to use it in this setting, you hadn't done your preps to use it in this setting. Can you just pull it out of the bag when you need it? And then the final one is the judgment of knowing when to do it. So when do we need to make joint decision making? Because you don't joint decision making all the time, it will take forever. So having that judgment is a whole other level. So with these behaviours, there's the knowledge, and often people stop at knowledge. Then there's the skill, developing the skill, like really developing the skill. Then there's ability to use it in practice. So it's like, you know, those simulation things, so those simulation planes or whatever. I mean, you might have been in a simulation plane, but then actually, which would be the skill, but the ability would be to use it when you're actually flying in the sky. So it's a different thing, you know. So, and then the judgment piece. Okay, and then it's about, so this is all of the stuff, and this last aspect, translate what these mean day to day. This is very much intertwined with the ability and judgment. So this is what I mean about all of these aspects intertwine. So we're translating what these mean day to day. So we can all know, and I've seen it so many times with people where they might have had some learning, they might have had some skill input, but then they don't know when, and there's this judgment thing, when to put that into practice. So when could I use that approach? When could I use that skill? And again, I know this from my coaching work, so I will work with people, and we may have done some skill development work, we may have done some input work, and they're successfully using some behaviours in some contexts, and then they'll talk to me about another challenge that they've had, and I'll say, oh, you could use that. Oh yeah, I could have used that. And it's helping people to connect, make the connections of when their skills can be used in the day-to-day. So helping people, and this is nice to do this sort of thing as a team, you know. So these skills and abilities that we've learned and we're developing, so how and when could we use these? And to have it as an exploration. So if we used it in this way, in these contexts, how might that work for us? Would that be beneficial? What would be the benefits? What would be the benefits? And how, it's just building, it's all the time building that muscle, building that knowledge, building that understanding, building the ability, building the judgment. So the next one, reward the behaviours, not with money. So these are, as humans, I haven't put attention there, that should have attention in there as well. So I would say attention is one of the biggest rewards we can give people, to listen, I suppose, listen and acknowledge your attention. So to listen to someone and really hear them, to acknowledge their contribution, to include them, to take action on what they're suggesting. So if someone says, sticking with collaboration, if someone's saying, oh, I think we should I think it would be beneficial to invite the supply chain to this meeting. And people go, yes, 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 no, I can see that. Nothing happens. So, like, really hear these suggestions that will enable and promote the behaviours that you want, and take action on them. Give it attention, give it priority, make it happen, and be consistent. Always challenge. And challenge the behaviour. So when we challenge people's behaviours, we need to be kind, because we all know that we'll have good intentions. So remember personal intent. Remember, they're probably trying really hard to be collaborative, and saying to them, that's not collaborative, is it? It's probably quite unhelpful. So another way to approach behaviours that we think are out of sync with what we're looking for, we can inquire. We can say, oh, I wondered how that might have felt for that other person. We can say, I'm just thinking about collaboration. How do you think we did in terms of collaboration in the way we handled that meeting? Did it feel collaborative? You can offer an alternative. You can say, I just wondered if we could have done that slightly differently. I wondered about maybe doing that. How do you think that might have been? Oh yeah, that would have worked. So there's lots of gentle ways that we can challenge behaviours and help people to see that there might be a different way. Because people will often do things in a certain way because they don't know how to do it differently, or that skill isn't easily accessible to them. So with the skills, when a skill becomes an ability, that's when it's much more easily accessible to the person. And as I say, they can pull it out the bag whenever they need it. So then we're on to review. We're nearly there, guys. We're nearly there. Review effectiveness of behaviours. So we need to do this all of the time. Don't just wait for the lessons learned process. So we can have terrible behaviours for 3 years and then we go, oh, how was that? So it's about making it part of our daily conversation. So in the same way we're monitoring the plan, the programme, let's keep that conversation, that dialogue going about how the behaviours are going. What are the behaviours that we've seen that have been helpful? What do we maybe need to do differently? So it's part of management conversations when you have your one-to-ones. It's part of when we're reviewing how effective a meeting's been. We talk about how the behaviours have been in that meeting, what behaviours enabled, the outcomes, what behaviours maybe didn't. And you can have like too many open questions. You can be too including and exploratory, and then the business doesn't get done. Because at the end of the day, the business needs to get done. And I've certainly sat in meetings where people have been out of politeness, or misguided politeness, I might say. They've allowed people to hog the airspace. And that's not okay, because it's actually not polite to the other people in the room. So it's about having everything in balance. So, and talking about behaviour, so my fantasy for performance generally is that people will learn to just constantly review. So how did that go? What went well? What didn't go so well? What could we do differently? And I know that this does happen. This is happening more and more. But it isn't this positive and negative feedback. It's really unhelpful to have positive and negative feedback. It's about getting into the mindset of review. So let's review how that went and look for what we want to do more of and look for what we want to do less of. And then there's no judgment and people aren't criticised. And if we're not judged and criticised and we don't feel bad and wrong, then we've got more energy for the next thing. When we criticise people, they can feel a need to assert themselves and push back. Whereas if it's the culture to just constantly review effectiveness without personal attachment, then you get a much stronger performance in an organisation. So in this, be specific. So identify what needs to be different. Okay, also actually we didn't yeah, we didn't close down the conversations enough, did we? We didn't get the business done. We didn't get all the decisions we needed. Why didn't we get all the decisions we needed? Well, we allowed that conversation to go off topic a bit too much. So, okay, so next time we either need to have less things on the agenda if that whole conversation was needed, or we need to have stronger chairing around the discussion around that topic. So that we can get the outputs from the meeting that we needed. And people are just always rushing off next thing, and if actually people took time, because there's so many things get revisited in meetings, whereas if people just took the time to close them out properly, then it would be much more efficient, and there'd be less hamsters in wheels. So, and make sure it happens. You know, if you've decided an action around a behaviour, then really do it. If you're just going to say, oh yeah, and not do it, then there's no point. Absolutely no point. And give it attention. So do it next time and notice that you've done it and recognise the benefits, which leads me to the next one. And this is about talking about the behaviours that have enabled the outputs and outcomes. So when behaviours are good, when behaviours are helpful, when behaviours are getting the outputs that we want, we don't talk about them in this way. So it needs to be part of our reporting process, part of our communications about why a project's gone well, and not just say behaviours. Let's get more specific, because that's how the learning happens. When we start to be more specific, then people can replicate. So it's about learning, understanding and replicating. It becomes useful when people are able to replicate them. So this is where we're back into the micro behaviours. Talk about the benefits and make them known, but you need to talk about micro behaviours. Just not go, oh yeah, people were collaborative, because people will not understand what that means. They will think they know what it means and they'll set the next project up, but they won't necessarily set it up in a way that enables all the micro behaviours that actually make collaboration happen. And this is the thing, building understanding around connection of inputs and outputs in behaviour. It's the last one, guys. So I shared this model with you before, if you're in the last webinar. So this model is called transactional analysis. For those of you who've not seen it before, it was developed by Eric Burns, and it's the parent-adult. I mean, it's if you've not seen it before, it really is fantastic. There's some great videos on YouTube. If you drop me a note, I'll send you the link to them, because they are fantastic if you're interested in this. It's about how he calls them 3 ego states. So we are often either in parent, adult, or child, and our behaviour is likely to cause a behaviour in another person or trigger a behaviour in another person, or there's a higher percentage will get a certain behaviour from another person. So often what we need in collaboration and in work, not all the time, but is a bit more adult behaviours. So adults treat people as equals, collaboration, because this is what we'd seen more in lockdown, actually, more adult to adult conversations, or what I was told people had seen and trade unions had seen as well, more bringing people into the problem, working collaboratively, adult to adult conversations. So it's the why, what, where, when, I think, I see, and being even. So the parent is, they can criticise and lecture, they can be supportive and nurture and provide structure and safety. They can talk down. The child can be creative and curious and spontaneous. They can also be rebellious and have tantrums and sulk, or comply and be submissive and follow instruction. So what I absolutely see happen in organisations, in project organisations, is leaders complaining that people aren't inventive enough, that they aren't coming up with enough ideas, that they aren't taking that they're not accountable. Yeah, this is good one, that they're not being accountable. But actually, when you lift the lid on it, what we're seeing is a lot of parent behaviours. And if you stay in parent, you're not going to get accountability. So this is what I mean about input and outputs. We will look at an output and go, well, they're doing it all wrong. We don't want them to behave like that. We want them to behave like this. And we have to go, well, what behaviours are you doing that are potentially prompting those behaviours in others? So there was a wonderful example in the one of the research, one of the people I was researching the lessons from lockdown with, where they were saying to me there'd been lots of adult to adult behaviours, and then they'd just switched back to the people in the rank and file had switched back to child on this particular topic. And I dug a little deeper and asked a few more questions about what they'd done when, how they'd done it, how they'd communicated this, and how they'd asked about that. And what had happened was the leadership had been in adult to adult, the way they'd been engaging and communicating. And then on this particular topic, they'd switched to parent, and the organisation just switched back to child. So this is what I mean about building understanding around the connection of inputs, behavioural inputs, and the outputs that you get. So the example I've given here is a behavioural input for behavioural output, but you can have a behavioural input for a different type of output. It might be a quality output, it might be a creative output, but it's about joining those connections around inputs and outputs, where the inputs are behavioural, so that people can start to really build an understanding of the benefits of using certain types of behaviours and the benefits of using certain approaches. And that's when you get the replication. So people need to really get the benefits in order to then be motivated to replicate and use those again. So all of these things, all of these wonderful things that we've just visited, I'm just going to pause here for a moment and talk about all of these things in terms of mental health. So I would say performance, culture, behaviours, well-being and mental health are all absolutely the same thing. So they are all different sides of the same coin. And all of these things that I've just talked you through, if you take this approach to developing behaviours in your organisations, these are all in support of mental health. If you want mentally healthy organisations, it's in the day-to-day behaviours and approaches to behaviours of your leaders and everybody else in the organisation. What we're doing a little bit around mental health is more of a fixie type, which is all good, it's all well and good. But if we really want the good mental health in our organisations, then the day-to-day behaviours are where it's really at. So identifying the micro behaviours. This enables people to know exactly what it is they're supposed to be doing and to have a level of consistency around them and predictability. That will support mental health, because something that people struggle with sometimes is knowing whether they're doing the right job, struggling to make things happen, wondering if they fit in with others, feeling they're at odds with others. All of those things are unhelpful to mental health. So doing these things will support mental health. Ensuring set of approaches, systems, process, decision making, all of these things that enable us. Well, when we're asking people to behave in a certain way, but everything in their environment is giving them different messages, that creates stress for them. It's very stressful. So that will have a negative impact on their mental health. So all of these things are little things that nibble away at our resilience and our ability to cope. And when you put them all together, it's like a stress load, and then that's when we start to have problems. So when we're challenged with mental health, it's the last straw, because it's all these micro things that all happen to overwhelm us or take us to the next place. So it's about looking at all the minutiae of the things that create the stress that we can avoid, because there's unavoidable stress, but there's a lot of avoidable stress in organisations. There's so many things organisations could do to reduce the stress and perform better, interestingly. So starting to develop the behaviours in leaders and managers, and demonstrating those behaviours consistently, developing the behaviours in everybody. So when you actively invest in everybody working in a joined up way with the same behaviours and approaches, people know what to expect, so you've got predictability, and things will work more effectively, and there's a lot of unnecessary, as I said, stress and difficulty. Everything's hard quite often, and it really doesn't need to be. If people were working in a more constructive way, it wouldn't be so difficult. So there's all of these things will support mental health. Translating what this means to the day-to-day, people understand what they're supposed to do. Being consistent about the behaviours, I think I've talked about all of these. So taking this sort of approach will be an enabler to mental health. I'm going to just quickly see. So as I said, these are all the problems that that get in the way. I've touched on most of these, I think. So yeah, people are attached to their behaviours. So as I said, it's about making sure they understand that it's not about getting rid of their behaviours, it's about broadening their range. Intent is not enough, and we've talked about all the things that need to happen rather than just intent. Clarity, and that's the micro behaviours. Competence, the knowledge, skill, ability, we've talked about that, how to develop the competence, and the conditions, the culture, the contract, we've talked about that too. I mentioned the lessons from lockdown webinar that we did last time. That is on YouTube, and they're the topics that we covered. If you're interested, you can check that out. And so to our closing slide, as I said, all 3 webinars are available on the YouTube channel. I also wrote an article in Project Magazine, the Project Magazine that is just out, Autumn's Project Magazine, on behaviours. So if you're interested to learn more, then do check that out. There's the lessons. I wrote a paper on lessons from lockdown as well, behaviours and mindsets. If you get in touch with me, I can get that to you. Do connect with me on LinkedIn. It's always great to hear from you, or get in touch directly via email. That's great, or visit the website. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Trish now. I know we need to let you go on time because you all have another meeting to get off to. So Trish.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you very much. I think we've got time to take a couple of questions that we've got in. The first one being, do you think that project teams can work out for themselves the micro behaviours?
Oh, that's a good question. So it's really interesting because it's the project teams that have the knowledge, but my personal experience of asking project teams to describe the behaviours to me is that they're not able to do that without facilitation. So it's about going back in and asking the question in different ways and digging deeper and laddering and so forth. That is how we actually get the behaviour. So I'd never say never, but I'd say my experience to date has been that would be probably not. But I would say that at some point in the future, then they will be, because I think as we move towards using the micro behaviours more, being more specific and getting used to talking about them, then that will build people's knowledge and understanding, and then absolutely they will be able to do it for themselves.
Brilliant, thank you for that. One more just before we close off. This one's about, do you think people understand the link between management behaviours and mental health?
No, they don't. And I think we've got such a long way to go on that. And I mean, I think managers generally don't recognise how important they are, and not in a bad way. I sometimes say to people, your first job, your manager, your manager's manager, your manager's manager's manager, and the next one, that's how important you are to people. And they go, no, I'm not that important. And I think there's something, and it's a humility thing. It's a humility thing for people. of them, of people being reluctant to recognise how much power and importance they have, and how much of an impact they can have with their behaviour and their day-to-day approach to things on the well-being and mental health of others. So no, I don't. But that isn't a criticism. As I said, I think it comes from humility, people's reluctance to acknowledge that.
Thank you, Wendy. As we're out of time, if there are any unanswered questions, we will pass them over to you for a response, Wendy, and we can get those published along with your slide pack and the recording for today's webinar. I'll pass back to Lauren now to close off today's session. Thanks all.
Thank you.